Hello everyone! In this video we'll be going over how to install and use Gaia, along with showing how to spawn our new beautiful biome using Unity's free Book of the Dead pack. In this video we'll be using Gaia Pro VS, which includes GTS, which we'll be showing near the end of the video, and we'll also be installing the Book of the Dead biome for Gaia Pro VS. If you're in Gaia for Unity 6, the process is much the same, however you don't have GTS included, and you won't need to install this Book of the Dead biome. It's already included in Gaia for Unity 6. When you first install Gaia Pro VS from the Unity Assets Store via the Package Manager, you'll see this setup window. This setup window allows you to install the various modules that Gaia has inside of it. For instance, you can see here right now everything's set to install and delete source, but if we wanted to, we could set it to just install and retain that source package. We could set it to delete that source package to clean up our file structure, or we could set it to just do nothing at all. In this case, we're going to install and delete source with everything, and you can see in Gaia Pro VS specifically, GTS is also included here. This is another one of our assets, and it improves the visual fidelity of the terrain. This is specifically only included in Gaia Pro VS, so if you're on Gaia 6, don't worry, that is not something that you need, it's just nice to have. So you're going to come down and press this Start Selected Actions button to trigger all of these processes. You'll see it says that we're deleting these source packages, and this is totally fine because they're all going to be installed first, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, we'll just press continue here. Once that installation has finished, you'll see that we have all the check marks here, and all of these have been shown to be installed. And you have an option to uninstall them if you want, but we're not going to do that today. So now we can close this setup window, then go to Window, Procedural-worlds, Gaia, Show Gaia Manager. It'll just take a moment to load. This is a first time thing and it's just setting everything up. Once that's done, we can dock this Gaia Manager window here, and you'll see that there are a bunch of warnings here. Right now I'm in an HGRP project, and this is why there are so many warnings. HGRP requires a little bit of extra setup to get everything looking great, but fortunately in the Gaia Manager we have this Fix All button, the magic button that you can press OK, and then all of those things will just get automatically set to be as visually interesting and beautiful as it should be. So you can see we're in the configuration tab right now. Our render pipeline is in the high definition render pipeline. We can close that and move on to the create world tab. Here is where most of the initial world design happens. We can see we have different world sizes here. You can choose everything from micro to a custom world size of gigantic proportions, and you can also set the number of tiles you might want your world to have. So these are tiles that are 2048 meters squared, and we could have a grid of 2 by 2, as you can see here, or we could have something even larger, so 4 by 4 by 2 or 4 by 4. It would do that accordingly. For this demo, we're going to just use a 1024 meter squared terrain. And we're going to be targeting the desktop platform. Each of these different platforms make the resolution of the terrain and other settings more suited to the performance profile of your target platform. So if we were making something for mobile or VR, we would select that and it would adjust things accordingly. You can also see we have this target biome. This is going to control which Gaia biome is added to the scene upon creation, and which texture spawner is used while we're creating the world to sort of texture our terrain and add some detail that way. You can see we don't have the Book of the Dead biome here yet, so we're going to need to install it. But before we do that, I'll also talk about the workflow. So there are a couple different workflows. The most simple and easy to get started with one is the World Designer. This creates a very easy to use wizard, which allows you to set up islands or mountains that are randomly procedurally generated, get something nice going super quickly. Or you'll have the stamper, and I'll go over the stamper a bit later, but note that if you select any of these, you're still able to go back to them and use them in the future. You're not locked into the World Designer workflow if you choose the World Designer now. To get that Book of the Dead biome in here, what we're going to do is add this to your assets, accept, and then you'll be able to open it in Unity. It'll bring you to the Package Manager where you can download this. You do not need to do this step if you're using Gaia for Unity 6. That has the Book of the Dead biome pre-included. So now we're going to import this from the Package Manager into our project. So now you can see this setup window has popped up, and we have another option here. Install and delete source, the Book of the Dead package. So we're going to start this action just like we did the others. If this isn't showing up, you might have to close and reopen the Gaia Manager window. In my case, I didn't end up needing to, but you may. And so now we can press the button to create our world designer. It'll prompt you to set up the HRP lighting. We'll say yes. And there you go. We can see a preview of what the world designer has made for us. The blue stuff would be underwater in this case. You can also see a scale along here. Make sure, if you deselect the world designer for any reason, to actually see the world designer and interact with it, you have to have it selected in the hierarchy and also be in the inspector tab of Unity. So it's really easy to use. We have these randomize stamps and randomize all buttons. Randomize all is like the super easy, hey, I just want to try different stuff until I find something I like. So if we keep pressing this and pressing this, we'll see different terrains that are kind of interesting in different ways. And what it's doing in the back end is just randomizing all the stamps and their positions and these sorts of things in the back end of the world designer. You can also get a lot more control by going into the world shape and world detail settings, where you can control what stamps might be included, what their odds are, their density, their jitter. And remember, if you ever want to go into more detail with Gaia, you have these question marks throughout all of the UI, which will give you a bunch of information about what every setting does and how it's useful and why it's there. So if you want to go into more control over the world designer, I recommend you dive into those settings. In this video, we're just going to randomize and try to find something with a little mountain and a nice plains area as well. Okay, so this is pretty good. We have two mountains here, a little lake in the center, and our border is water as it's been set. Now we're just going to press this generate world button. Now this is actually going to create the terrains and stamp them with the shape that our world designer made, and also texture them. Now, if we come back to the Gaia Manager, which should happen automatically, you'll see we are now in the Create Runtime tab. This adds controller support, HDRP water support, and also suitable lighting for your scene. We're just going to choose Flycam, that's great. Our lighting preset will be Book of the Dead. Wind is calm, all of this seems good to me. We have a few other controller types that you can use through the Unity starter assets, or you can use your own custom controller, but for now we're just going to use the Flycam, and now we're going to create our runtime. So you can see this prompt has come up. This is just warning us that in HRP we have to enable water ourselves, and to do this we can go to the HRP water object in the scene, and it should give us a button that brings us to that setting in the render pipeline asset. So we're going to press OK. And then you can see things are a lot more pretty here. Our post-processing stack has gone into effect and our lighting has been set up more accurately, but no water. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Unity HRP water object, and you can see, hey, we need to enable the water system in our HRP asset. So let's open that, go down to water, and simply click enable. Then when we go back to our scene, it'll load for a second, and there we go. Now we have water. So now let's talk about the stamper. I mentioned that there's ways to use the stamper to modify the terrain after you use the world designer to get an initial look, or you can use the stamper right from the beginning. This time we're going to use the stamper afterwards. We're going to go to the Advanced tab of the Gaia Manager, and then go to the Stamper button here. Just click that, and you can see it's added this object to our scene called Stamper, and also opened this stamp browser window. What the stamper does is it takes a texture, which represents a height map, and then allows us to stamp that height map onto the terrain. And this is super flexible because it allows you to stitch together different mountains and plains and these sorts of things in a really intuitive and easy way. The stamper also allows us to scale different properties of this. So if we want it bigger or smaller or higher, we can do all of that. Or if we want to change the shape to something more mountainous, we can do that as well. Gaia offers a wide array of different stamps, and there are also many more stamp packs available on Canopy, which you can find for specific uses. Like there's a craters pack, which I really enjoy, for instance. So this mountain stamp looks pretty good, and I'd love to stamp it somewhere over here. Or maybe, yeah, over here, something like this would be great. But you can see if we want this mountain to be high, we can't really do that, because right now if we were to stamp, we'd have this weird ledge on our terrain. The preview is accurate, and this will be how our terrain would look after the stamping. And that's where the distance mask and other mask settings come in. To remedy this problem, we can simply turn on this distance mask, and it will make it so that the stamp blends or reduces its strength the farther from the center the stamp is. So in this case, we've turned the distance mask on, and you can see we don't have that problem where the ledge is going to be causing a bunch of issues. It blends much better into our existing terrain. So let's stamp that. And there you go. You can see this stamping has been done, and also the texture spawner has happened right afterwards. Automatically, our terrain has been stamped and textured and is looking pretty good. You can construct entire terrains this way by moving around different stamps and changing which stamp you want to use. And if you accidentally close that stamp window, no worries. You can reopen it by pressing this stamp button here and then go through different categories and different stamp types to get the type of world that you want. Now let's look at the biome. This biome was spawned when we made our world designer in the Create World tab, and its texture spawner has been used throughout this whole time. The stamper was calling it, and the world designer was calling this macro texture spawner. But now it's time for us to actually spawn it across the whole world. Spawning an existing biome is super easy. All you have to do is either spawn biome local, which will spawn specifically within the spawner range, this red cube that you see here. In this case, that's the whole world, so it would spawn everywhere. Or spawn biome world, which spawns across all the terrains and all the space in your world. This time, we're just going to go for spawn biome world. It should work well. And now it's going to go through every sub-spawner that this biome has, and using their rules, spawn them across the terrain. So it's going to go in order. You see it's going through trees, and then stumps, and then the undergrowth layers here. And it'll go through all of these different layers to construct a really complex and cohesive environment. So now you can see that this biome has been spawned, and our world has been populated with a lot of assets. We have trees, grass, all sorts of things. And if I enable the post-processing here, we'll be able to see that it is quite pretty. We've got fog, ferns, trees, logs, grass, everything. Now let's say you want to modify this biome. Maybe you want the area to be more sparse, maybe this density isn't enough, or maybe it's too little. You can do this really easily by changing the global spawn density here. This affects all spawners, regardless of where they are. So if you change it here, you're changing it everywhere. But it's a really helpful tool to just very quickly iterate on your biome to get different looks out of it. So before you saw we had like a fairly dense forest. Now it's much more sparse. And if we were to lower this further down to something like 0.1, you would see that sparseness increase even more. So there we go. Now this is an extremely sparse biome with not many trees or grass or anything really. But if we wanted to go even higher, we could go up to 1, and then we could see that this is an extremely dense biome now. We have dense grass, trees, rocks. Assets are spawning at a much higher rate per square meter. And it looks very good. But there is, of course, performance implications for spawning more and more assets. So that's something to keep in mind. Typically, it's good to keep it at the default 0.8. Now, what if you just want to change the density of a single spawner? For instance, maybe you want the trees to be less sparse, but the rocks and stumps and everything else to not change. Well, to do that, you need to go through each spawn rule in the tree spawner. There are a few ways to approach this. You can change your spawn probability rate, which is the simplest way to do it, or you can change your location increment. The location increment is the distance between all the sample positions that the trees would spawn. So with a grid location increment of 4, you can imagine a grid 4 meters wide being cast across your entire terrain. And at each of these points, a tree will attempt to be spawned. So obviously, if you change your location increment to something larger, something like 8, then there will be fewer points that will attempt to spawn a tree, and therefore fewer spawns. So if I were to change the location increment to 8, I would get wider tree spawns, but also fewer. However, if you change the spawn probability rate, this simply just every sample, if a success is found, then it'll apply this spawn probability rate to it and change the odds of that tree being spawned. So it has some chance of then failing at each of those spawn points. So in this case, we're going to change the spawn probability rate by minus, let's say 50% in each of these rules. All right, so now we're going to spawn world. And you can see that our grass and the rocks and stuff is all at a similar density as it was before, the same density in fact, but our trees are much sparser. That's the basic way to change the density of these spawns, but there are many, many other settings which give you control around exactly where an object should spawn, whether that's in crevices, in pits, on the tops of mountains, in the sea, all sorts of different settings that will allow you to do that sort of thing. There's another video that gives you a lot more in-depth information about how spawners work and every little nitty-gritty detail. So I've now respawned this biome, and what I'm going to do is apply GTS to our terrain. Now, if you're not using Gaia Pro VS, then you'll have to install GTS now, but Gaia Pro VS comes with it included. So we can simply go procedural-worlds, GTS, GTS Manager. Now you'll see there's a missing GTS profile, and I'm just going to create a new one. And then all you have to do to get this going is apply the profile to your scene. GTS will then go through all of the texture arrays present on your terrain and set them up within the GTS system. There we go. So you can see GTS has now changed the appearance of our terrain's textures. There's a lot more detail from the distance, and there's a lot more accurate coloring as well. GTS allows us to do a lot of interesting things. For instance, if we wanted snow high up on our mountains, we could very easily do that. If we come to things like this rock texture, we can see that this texture is being stretched along this elevated portion here. This is just a thing that happens when you're not rendering things triplanarly, and this is a default thing that the Unity terrain shader does. However, GTS allows you to set a layer as triplanar, so it doesn't stretch in very steep areas, and instead projects on the terrain exactly how you would expect everywhere. This is really helpful. And another thing that we can do, for instance, for this grass here, if we wanted it to be a bit brighter or something like this, we can change the tint. This is another thing that you're not really able to do in the normal Unity terrain. And in this case, we don't really want to change it that much. Maybe we want it a bit brighter to show that it's more lively in the terrain down here. But this is another really helpful thing that can come in clutch when you don't have the absolute perfect texture for the color of your grass or something like this. You can also set the wetness of your terrain globally with the rain settings. For instance, if you want to set this dynamically, it's super easy to call GTS's API, and when it's raining in your game, you can just change this power here and make it so that everything looks, well, wet. There are also settings focused around making the terrain more appealing from a distance. For instance, using this variation texture that gets overlaid on top of your terrain. You can see with this off, the surfaces look kind of bland and flat. But if we turn the variation texture on, you can see there's just a little bit more detail everywhere across our terrain. And this really helps when looking at things from a distance to add that extra level of visual interest and really make things pop. GTS also has features which enhance the visual appearance of your textures. For instance, height blending, which allows you to blur the otherwise very obvious borders between textures by being more physically accurate. It also has anti-tiling features. By enabling stochastic tiling, you're able to pretty much completely eliminate that visual repetition you always get on default Unity terrains. That's a basic introduction to GTS, and with that, our introduction to Gaia has concluded. I hope this was helpful, and please don't hesitate to leave any comments or questions in the description.